with tears in your eyes. And thank you for allowing me to once again come here and share some time with you. And so thank you and God bless you.
Thank you very much, Chief Man Keller. And somebody set me up and put me next on the program, so I don't know how I'm going to follow that up. And I knew I couldn't say anything inspirational, so I did my normal egghead thing, but we couldn't have slides out here. Unfortunately, first of all, I'd like to thank Chief Hicks's office and especially Ashley Brown for inviting me here so that I could visit with all of you and see lots of old friends. I'm Brett Riggs, by the way. I work at the University of North Carolina, and I was formerly with the Tribal Historic Preservation Office of the Eastern Band. So I didn't want to cross up too much with what other people were doing, and I didn't know what other people were doing. So I thought I'd talk about volcanoes. I wanted to see your faces first. But really, I'm going to talk about volcanoes. Now, what do volcanoes have to do with this place? And with the events that led up to the great council at this place in August of 1837 that we know about? Well, actually, they do have something to do with it. There was a volcano in Nicaragua that blew its top on January 20th of 1835. Cosiguina. It was one of the biggest volcanoes of the millennium. It blew an incredible amount of dust into the atmosphere when it went off. 40 times as much dust into the atmosphere as Mount St. Helens. It was dark for days in Nicaragua. They never saw the sun. It was dark as night. Well, when you put that much dust into the atmosphere, it has a big effect on the weather. And we started feeling the effects within the next 2 weeks. So that on February 5th of 1835, they had right here in East Tennessee what they call Cold Friday. The temperature never got above zero that day. Cattle froze to death standing in the fields. Over in North Carolina, people died in their houses. People up on Nantahala River, Cherokee people, died inside their houses, whole families, that night. So that was a big deal. It changed weather throughout. The rest of the winter was cold. The spring was cold. There were late frosts. Spring was late coming on. And it was late before people could get their crops in the ground, could get the corn planted. Crop came along pretty well that summer because usually you have a hot summer after a big volcano like that. But you also have early frosts. A traveler up to the valley towns, a guy, Lieutenant Charles Nolan was up there. He was actually up there with Commissioners Curry and Schermerhorn. They were trying to conclude a treaty, get it to meet in North Carolina. They already had a draft treaty from the treaty party and trying to get people on board. Nobody would meet with them. They were there all by themselves. But Nolan kept a journal. And in that journal he noted that on September 27th they had an unusual freeze, a hard killing freeze that killed all the standing corn out in the fields. Now because the corn crop was late coming on, people couldn't save it. They lost it all. And they lost crops all across the Cherokee Nation and all across the South. In the months that, by October, there were reports coming into newspapers in Macon, Georgia, how the corn crop was lost, half of the cotton crop was gone. In Kentucky, they lost all the corn. They lost the tobacco crop. And so the news started trickling in. Think about what this meant for people. Not only did they know that their crop was gone, the bread corn that folks here in Cherokee Nation depended on, but the crops all around them were gone as well. They knew that this had serious repercussions, not just for food for the next year, but it had political repercussions. Because when the commissioners came back and they went to New Echota to conclude that infamous treaty in December of 1835, they knew everybody was going to be out of food. And the treaty party, the Ridges, those people who went in, they knew it too. They knew when they got inside the house there that they had to come to an agreement. They had to negotiate, because if they waited, and the treaty was going to happen, you know, there were things going on about treaties all over the place. But they knew if they didn't strike right then, if they waited until the food ran out, they had no negotiating power whatsoever. And so they signed that treaty. When they signed that treaty, when they were renegotiating that, they put in an article, a clause to that treaty. And it said, whereas, in consequence of the unsettled affairs of the Cherokee people and the early frosts, their crops are insufficient to support their families, and great distress is likely to ensue. And whereas the nation will not until after their removal be able advantageously to expend the income of permanent funds, it's therefore agreed that annuities of the nation, which may accrue under this treaty for the next 2 years, shall be expended in provisions for the benefit of the poor class of the nation. Now this did a couple of things. One, of course, it provided for food aid for people, but secondly, it put control of that food aid in the hands of the treaty party. It took the annuity of the Cherokee Nation out of the hands of the national government. Basically, it emptied the treasury of the nation, put that under control of the treaty party for the next 2 years, and that's what the federal government did. They leveraged the prospect of a famine in the Cherokee Nation to force this treaty. Now, this wasn't the first time this had happened. The reason folks went into this conference knowing that there was going to be a problem was because there had been a volcano in 1815, probably the very biggest one of the millennium. Mount Tambora in Indonesia blew up, and it created a worldwide winter. 1816 was the year without a summer. It froze every single month in the Cherokee Nation in 1816. There were no crops made. There were no crops made anywhere around. The price of corn went to $2 a bushel. And so different towns in the nation, one by one, went to the federal agent, R.J. Meigs, and asked for assistance. And Meigs began to buy corn for different towns. And he bought that out of the annuity until he'd spent up all the annuity money. And he spent the annuity money for the next year, and the next year, and the next year, until finally the federal government was racking up debt against the Cherokee Nation, or the Cherokee Nation was racking up debt, running their line of credit against the Cherokee Nation just for food, just to get enough food to get people through this very hard time. There were riots all over Europe for food that year, as there were in 1836. Because they had racked up so much debt, corn debt, the federal commissioners came back to